Welcome to We and Lewis, a podcast dedicated to celebrating the remarkable, creative, and energetic people who live in Lewis, Delaware, and are helping our community forge a collective soul as appealing as it is unique. They are the We in Lewis. I'm Kevin McGinnis. Our guest today is Abraxas Hudson, a Lewis native, artist, gallery owner, teacher, and naturalist, who brings to his art a relentless commitment to research and analysis normally found in other professions. His studio on 2nd Street, like so much of his work, serves as a welcome oasis of calm amidst storefronts, parked cars, and restaurants. Today's episode is sponsored by Ray Damager Design. Located in the middle of downtown, Ray offers full-service graphic design for print advertising, materials, identity and logo design, business cards, and so much more. From personal experience, I know Ray is wonderful to work with, patient, willing to listen, and committed to success. He also always finds a way to include his own touch. For example, when he designed our podcast logo, he made the microphone mirror the World War II lookout towers in Cape Henlopen State Park. Ray can be found on Facebook. Brax, thanks for joining us today, and welcome to the podcast.
Good morning. Thank you for the intro.
Before we begin, I just wanted to double-check. Abraxas is not a normal name one hears around here. I think it has a very long Egyptian and Greek origin. And when your parents chose it, was it in reference to the Santana second album, or were there other things involved?
Yeah, I'd say that definitely piqued their interest. Then my dad dug a little further and found out that it went back thousands of years to a pre-Sumerian civilization. And I think at that point, once he found out more information about the name, he was sold and thought, right on. So here we go. You know, it was a challenge as a kid to have such a unique name, but now it's kind of cool as an artist. But, you know, as a child...
Did you have to do a lot of spelling for people in school?
Right. Even people within my family, no one knew how to spell it. They still don't, but it's all right.
Many of your reviews include the word tranquil, or the phrase offering calm in a chaotic world. How would you describe your style of painting?
So my goal is to illuminate nature and also paint scenes that invite you in and inspire you to get out and explore the world. Or if you can't, you know, while you're in your office stressed out about work, you can look at one of my paintings and hopefully it'll sort of calm you down and take you to that special place in nature. That's my goal, right? Inspire people to get outside, but also, if they can't, give them a visual escape.
You place great importance on the contrast of light and shadow. How is that even possible, since the contrast is constantly changing over the course of a day, which I'm assuming has not only an impact on color, but also in definition?
So you definitely have to be mindful of the color of light, the intensity of it. You know, there are a lot of options. So throughout the day, the sun rises and sets on opposite sides of the sky, or, you know, the landscape. So you have 180 degrees of variance throughout the day as far as establishing a light source. And then also from the shortest day of the year to the longest day of the year, there's about a 75-degree variance of where the sun comes up or where it comes down on the north to south range. So my point is that as an artist, you have a lot of opportunity for creativity. So I like to focus on light and shadow, but I also try to keep it within the realm of reality while navigating that wide envelope you have of possibilities to establish where the light source is. Because you have to have a very stable light source. The reason is if you move your light source, the shadows shift. So even when you're out painting on location all day long, as you said, the sun's moving all day, right? So I establish the basic objects, and then in my mind, I know where the light and shadow are going to be cast. So even when the light and shadow changes later, I've already locked in my mind the scene, and it's got to be stable. You know, if you looked at a painting and you saw shadows protruding from the left-hand side in this section and then from the right-hand side in that section, it would really confuse the viewer. Even if they couldn't place what was wrong, it wouldn't look right. So I really pay a lot of attention to detail.
And you don't use photographs, is that right?
So I take photographs, but if anything, I'll use them as a starting point to spark a memory, or say for architectural details. So I like things to be really perfectly correct. And then I like to get creative with the I guess the weather, the atmospherics, natural elements, things that I can make up that will help me evoke the feeling I want to create in my painting. while not being tied to an exact photo, right? So some people like to copy photographs. I don't. I like to create my own little universe, because really that's the value that I think painters have. Well, I shouldn't say the value. That's the advantage that painters have over photographers, is that we really truly determine what stays, what goes, what we add to the painting, what we take away. It's like I tell my students, every stroke is intentional. With every stroke, you're building the scene. And you are the ultimate decider as to what stays, what goes, what gets accentuated, what gets softened and can be faded off into the distance. So there's a lot of freedom there, right? Every stroke is a choice. Every stroke's intentional. So you really have to think about where you're going. And if you're not thinking about where you're going, being able to adapt as you go is kind of cool. So, and that's actually why I love oil painting, because when I paint, my paintings are kind of an ongoing experiment. I'll try something. If I like it, I do more of it. If I don't like it, I'll shift gears and try something different.
Does that result, though, in times when you'll paint a scene and someone might recognize a feature in that scene and say, that doesn't look, that's not the right color?
So actually, my first big local scene around here was a painting of the Cape Henlopen Lighthouse. It was called First Light. I released it back in '97. I did very well with it. It was basically an aerial view looking from the back of the lighthouse over the ocean at sunrise. And the Cape Henlopen Lighthouse fell in 1926. So I did a lot of research. I had every nuance tight and detailed to the best of my ability in research. And a woman who has a local business had intended to buy a huge stack of my paintings. And when she saw it, she said, I was going to be a great customer of yours, but there's something wrong in your painting. And I said, well, what is it? I've researched everything. I thought, sure, I nailed it. And she told me I had the roof color wrong. And I explained to her that the color of the roof in my painting differed from the color of her expectation based on the light and shadow, because a warm light is going to create a different color shadow. There's this balance that occurs, right? An object is illuminated by the sun, but if it's not hit by the sun, it's now illuminated by the sky, which has a different color. I tried to explain that to her. She wasn't buying it. But the funny thing was, it was a great lesson, because I realized if you're painting specific architectural elements or specific places, the people that know that place are going to be the people who most likely buy your painting, and they know that place better than you do. So make sure your details are right. So even though I thought I was right, it was another reminder that, make it right, or your affinity crowd who will most likely buy your piece might not be sold on it.
Did she end up buying?
No, never bought any. That's okay. It's that piece sold out in a few years, and it kind of put me on the map locally as far as someone who, rendered the local area while I'm here, right? So a lot of us artists, we think of ourselves as chroniclers of the time, kind of like an author. So looking back, Howard Schroeder, Jack Lewis, different artists, if you look at their paintings, it's very cool, because it's the landscape, the waterfront, the seascape of the era they lived in, and now, as we know, it's changing all the time. So it's kind of cool.
For someone such as myself, who once lost a family game of Pictionary because I couldn't draw a hot dog on time, how do you capture such detail?
That's awesome. So, patience. When I first started painting, I realized my brain's different than most people. For whatever reason, I have a very unnatural level of patience and determination. So I thought, well, looking around, my other artist friends would spend a few hours, maybe a couple days at the most, on a painting. And I thought, well, if I spend 2 to 4 months on a painting, it's naturally going to separate my work. And so just hour after hour of studying the nuance that separates one object from another within a painting. There are a lot of subtleties that determine an object, right? You've got shape, texture, tonal value, relationship to other objects. So in answer to your question, a hot dog sounds simple, but when you go to draw it, if you don't have a basic feeling for sketching what you see and really breaking something down into its basic form and ratios, you're kind of lost. So when I teach people how to sketch what they see. That's basically the foundation. So a lot of art comes in many forms, as you know, but most of the great artists, especially since the Renaissance, they began as realistic sketch artists. Basically, the idea being that you need to learn the rules before you can break them. Or the example I like to use is Salvador Dali. So if you want to paint a camel with pogo stick legs and a clock dripping over his back, you have to know how to accurately render all those elements realistically so that you can then form them, shape them, mold them, kind of tweak them to your own reality.
How long does it take you to finish a painting?
So it varies. I've painted paintings in as quickly as a few weeks if I'm on a tight time crunch, and that's basically day and night with lots of coffee. But I've also spent 6 or 7 months on the painting, my larger works.
Do you do one at a time? Because I understand some artists will have like 3 or 4 projects going at the same time.
Right. So I think, the way my mind works, I like to just stick to it until it's finished. Because my concern is that naturally we try to avoid what's difficult. So if I'm doing 3 paintings at once, if one gets difficult, the natural inclination would be to go to something that's easier. So I would rather push through it and just finish the project instead of perpetuating all 3 into infinity by avoiding the difficult process of each. Also, I do a lot of what's called wet on wet painting. So oil paint dries very slowly, and a lot of artists like that, and some don't like it, right? But for me, what I like to do is really work a lot of color in together to create my scenes. So if I'm doing a sky, my whole sky is wet, and with oil paint, I've got the whole day to work on it that way.
And you don't use certain colors, is that right?
I don't use black or white. Well, basically, I think of them as absolutes, right? White and black would both be either the absence of color or so much light that there's nothing there, kind of a blown out photograph. Like, in other words, if you take a photograph of sunset, your camera has to expose for either the sky or the foreground, typically. If it exposes for the sky, the foreground might be black. If it exposes for the foreground, the sky might be a white out condition. So basically, that's kind of the extreme of the black and white, right? But what I really enjoy doing is just looking at the subtle nuance within each section of my paintings. So for instance, here, this would be an example. On a bright day, look at a white cloud. So at first glance, you say, all right, white cloud, blue sky, that's simple. But when you really look at it, your eye starts to calibrate to the brightness of the cloud. And then if you really calm yourself down, you'll see the subtle gradations from, if I simplify it, white to light gray to darker, 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 often fading into the blue sky. So white is almost lazy, right? Versus really looking at the subtle gradations within the scene. So there's an Italian word that Da Vinci used called, well, the word is sfumato, to make like smoke. So transitions, soft diffusion, there are different elements that you bring in to create depth, space. So you've got constant transitions in the subject that you're viewing, but also in your painting. So that nature of graduated tonal value, and then the level of compression, whether it's tight or broad, it's something you're always, as an artist, you're always thinking about. How to blend something to make it look three-dimensional.
And you do that by making layers?
So layers, but also just thinking of the value that's there from the light side to the shadow side. Is that a very narrow transition from light to shadow, or is it a wide transition? Like imagine a pencil versus a 55-gallon drum. So on a pencil, you've got a very tight transition from light to shadow. On a 55-gallon drum, you've got a wider brush you would use as to create a wider transition from light to shadow. So that's the whole thing, really. Painting is everywhere you look. If you really want to create that depth, you've got transitions because you're trying to create three-dimensional space. So you've got this situation where you're pushing in shadows and pulling out highlights. And what I really think about quite often when I'm painting is clay. So I imagine that I'm a clay modeler. I'm trying to create depth by adding solidity, highlights, and then adding space by creating shadows where you've got a place for your eye to kind of dissolve into without a very clear surface. Oil is very flexible, so I can kind of paint quite often with just an open-ended adventure mindset, being open to things, not knowing where it's going to go. Like as an example, I did a painting of Gordon's Pond years ago. I was painting out in the marsh and really wasn't sure which element of life I was going to add. And a blue heron landed right in front of me in the perfect place. Wow. I was like, wow, if I'm still enough and quick enough at the same time, I can paint him while he's there. And it was really cool. I painted him and he flew away, and that was the central element of my painting that I needed, but I had not thought about until the point where I saw it.
You studied with the artist Libby Avery Berry, I believe, who had mastered what's called the deep color layering techniques normally associated with the Renaissance. What is so unusual about this technique?
when I first saw her paintings, what really struck me was the very energetic light and life that she imbued in her work. She was actually a very successful wildlife artist in the 80s. So she had a natural emphasis on nature, which I really loved. But the other thing that really drew me to her was a very simple frustration I had in high school. So I was expected to go to college. I had people offered to send me to college. And my big viewpoint was, in my mind, it was very clear. I wanted to be a professional artist. I knew what I wanted to paint, and what I wanted to paint was not being taught in the schools that I was checking out. But the other issue was that I saw there was a massive, massive lack of business education in art schools, and it's still a major deficit. I don't really know why that's not addressed. But as an artist with my own art gallery, I have these discussions all the time with artists who went to art school, and I asked them, are you still painting? How are you doing? Did you make a profession out of it? And it's very rare to hear of artists who go to art school and come out and actually make a living as professional artists. So I wanted to learn from someone who actually made it on Main Street as an artist, right? Not someone who was protected by a paycheck in academia. I did a 6-week oil painting course with her 2 weeks after I graduated from Cape Henlopen. I flew out to Washington State, did a 6-week course. She and I really hit it off, and we became friends, and I basically did kind of an apprentice-mentor type of relationship with her. I painted in her studio for months after the class. And the funny thing was, I was the worst student in the class. I was terrible. I just have such an aversion to authority and guidance. I'm so strong-willed. It was a major barrier. She'd tell me to do something, and I'd break my brushes and walk down the street and tell her I was going back home to Delaware. I've never said this before, by the way, to anybody, really. So I had this, really weird natural disagreement when people tell me what to do. But once I can validate that they're right, I'll be all in. But I have this weird natural just aversion to being told what to do, right? So it was a very weird experience, but she knew I had promise. For whatever reason, she stuck through all my insanity. But it was interesting because the way that she taught me how to paint was very, very difficult. Not only was I not really buying it, what she was trying to tell me, but when she would tell me to do something, I couldn't see how it actually applied. So I had a very hard time getting what she was trying to teach. But then once I finally got it, I really got it. And then within 2 years, I was teaching with her around the country at her side, which was really wild because at that point, the students I was teaching were often twice my age because I was 19 years old. But it was kind of an interesting journey, really, just this weird, a weird resistance to this new knowledge that was so different than anything I had ever done before with my art. The other thing is when I first got to her course, when I first arrived, I was pretty confident in my ability as a watercolor artist, so I felt like I could render scenes pretty well with watercolor. And it was a different approach than she was teaching me. Basically, with watercolor, what I was doing was matching the color that I saw, and I got really good at that. So, the variations of blues in the sky, an old rusty workboat, all the subtle variations of color. So seeing very clearly what was in front of me and then relaying that to my watercolor brush was something I was feeling good about. Well, then I got to her course, and she said basically, we're no longer going to be surface painting, which is what she would call it, where you match color. We're going to follow this guideline of rules of how light, color, and basically the science of observation work. And so you're now going to be building up to the color that you want versus just matching a color and applying it to your painting. So there's this really very challenging process where you're not matching color. You're starting with colors that are just completely bizarre, but you follow this formula and you get to the color that you want, and it gives more life because you're building up to the light instead of just painting what you see on a 2D surface. You're, in your mind anyway, you're trying to create this three-dimensional space in your painting, and I finally got it, and then I was sold on it, and now I'm teaching it as well because I really love the technique. It works for me.
It's a harder technique though, isn't it?
It's very difficult, and there's a main barrier for people when it's called the mud. So you start mixing all these colors together and you create an absolute disaster. And most people want to at that point just throw their painting in the trash can. But the way to get through that is to literally just push through it and keep painting.
Does this go back to the style that was actually used by the Renaissance masters?
Exactly. Up until the Renaissance, most paintings were pretty flat, pretty two-dimensional. There was not a lot of emphasis placed on perspective or atmosphere. And that's something I really love teaching is atmosphere. Basically, between you and any object that you view, there are particles, right? Whether it's just air and dust or fog and mist and smoke. So really creating depth within a painting is often done by increasing contrast as the object is closer to you and then decreasing contrast as it goes away. So imagine right next to you is a checkerboard. It would be black and white. Way off in the distance, that checkerboard would be gray and white. So if you had a big checkerboard in front of you that's black and white, a distant checkerboard that's gray and white and smaller, the gray one is naturally going to be further away. So really that awareness of depth, of diffusion of objects in the distance, that was a big factor as well in the Renaissance that I really try to incorporate in my paintings.
You had said earlier when you were talking about your tutelage, you broke your brushes and stormed out. Was that when you were taking the multiple week course, or was that after you were working together?
Actually, for the first 3 years of my oil painting career experience, I was very, very frustrated. I broke my brushes all the time. I had to paint in a locked room quite often with my music turned up, one song on repeat. I really struggled for a long time. And then finally I had a really weird cognition, actually. I had a near-death experience. And I came back and I just had a much more relaxed approach and I just painted and stopped thinking. And all of a sudden my paintings just flowed and I had some strange, deep soul-level grasp of what I was trying to do versus the struggle I had up until that point. And I actually never broke a brush again.
Wow. So from that experience, you learned how to accept what you were creating?
There was just something weird about it. There was some deep knowingness, but also a relaxation that came upon me. Just go, just do it. Stop thinking so much.
And how old were you when this happened?
19.
You frequently have shared that you go on walks. When you go, do you always take a notebook along with you?
Well, there are no absolutes, right? But yes, I love to go out and walk for exercise, fresh air, relaxation, observation, all those things. But for sure, sketching on location is very cool because two things. Number one, it forces me to get in that constant zone of how do I recreate what I see with my artistic tools. But also it's very calming. So a lot of times I go on a walk for, mental health reasons, right? Just to calm down from this crazy world. And what I find in myself and my students is that basically creating art is what I call active meditation. I'm so zeroed in on the shape and contour, shadow of that leaf that all of a sudden all my worries in the world just completely disintegrate and I'm just focused on that leaf. That's all that exists in my world. So there are different reasons why I sketch,
And sometimes you also sell those sketchings. Is that right?
I do, absolutely. Yeah, I love sketching and my collectors do as well. It's a very simple beauty. The world is heading towards high def, 4K, 5K, 6K, just really crazy, right? All the color and tech, which I think brings a certain value to the foundational aspect of just a black and white sketch. It's kind of like radio versus high def TV. There's a different observational experience there.
Or a podcast.
There you go. Absolutely.
You're known around town as someone who has strong and independent opinions. You're also known as someone who does an incredible amount of research on topics of importance to you. How does this trait play into your art?
About 15 years ago, I thought in my artwork, when I'm trying to paint a scene, say I'm doing a table of flowers, well, I've got to really study those flowers. I've got to understand their shape, the colors. I want to kind of dig into the origin, just really have a very deep, deep understanding of that subject so that I can accurately portray it. And then even within that painting, there might be other elements that are relative or pertain to the primary subject. And so then you have kind of this full spectrum awareness that you want to have of a particular subject, right? So I thought, what if I apply that same level of deep deconstruction to reevaluate and then form my own opinions. What if I applied that to the larger world of geopolitics, politics, any other subject? And I just found it really interesting to do deep dives. Basically, what I tell my students when I'm teaching them how to sketch or paint, as I say very simply, remove the label, just see what's there. So the label is what we're told something is. Well, there's a green car. All right, naturally your brain says, it's a green car. Of course it's a green car. Well, really look at it. Is it really green? Let's look at the subtle shapes of it, the subtle shadows. How about the highlight? Is that green or is that blue or is it yellow? So kind of removing the label and seeing what's there just leads me down all sorts of rabbit holes in my art as well as life beyond my art.
You said earlier something that Heidi Lowe had said about working with other artists in this area or around the country who have been told throughout their careers they don't know how to run a business. They can't run a business. And her argument is they can. And some of the very same traits that it takes to be an excellent artist are totally applicable to the business world. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's unfortunate that there isn't more basic foundational understanding of the business of art. Specifically in the art world, you know, I think that most of us artists are kind of out there, a little different, right? On the fringe, just naturally doing our own thing. And that does not always equate to solid, fundamental daily life details like paying bills and financial planning or running a business. I mean, some artists might just want to sit in their room, smoke pot, and paint flying blue monkeys. Well, that's great, but is anybody going to buy them?
I really have no idea what to say to that one.
Other than you want to buy one of them?
No, I really don't want to buy a picture of flying monkeys. That's me. That's me.
But, you know, I guess to further that point, I want to paint as a professional, right? So what am I painting? Am I painting what I want, or am I painting something that I'm hoping collectors may want to buy? We've got to find that happy medium. Because if I find out that collectors around here only want to buy red trash cans, well, I've got a problem because I don't want to paint that. So I've got to find a target audience who appreciates the same things I appreciate. And then, like for myself, I love lighthouses for many reasons. You know, it's a beacon of safety to a stranger, right? It's kind of a universal person helping another person at a very foundational level. There's something deep to me about lighthouses guiding you through the darkness. There's a lot of cool stuff there, right? So some people might just assume I paint lighthouses because it's a commercial success. That's actually not true at all. Like, I'm very concerned about the fact that the Harbor of Refuge foundation wall is failing. It bothers me. It bothers me that the Corps of Engineers has written it off because basically any amount of money they throw into it is not going to be as important as the amount of money they throw into deepening the channel in the northern Delaware Bay, because they've got a cost-benefit analysis they've got to make, which I understand. But for me, I love our lighthouses. We lost the Cape Henlopen Lighthouse in 1926, and I would just hate to lose the Harbor of Refuge Lighthouse out here. So, you know, luckily, I love lighthouses, and other people do as well. So it's a natural fit. But I paint far more than just lighthouses. There's that also. You know, when I first did the piece I told you about earlier, the Cape Henlopen Lighthouse, people said, "Oh, wow, look at lighthouse artists." And I thought, gosh, that's weird. People really love to put labels on people and things, you know. And at that time, I was also doing portraits and all kinds of things, but that was the subject that I received a lot of attention for.
You're a Lewis native, a member of a very well-known family in the area. What was Lewis like when you were growing up?
More intimate experience as far as fewer families, just a quieter lifestyle, but very safe. Just a really nice place to live and grow up, I thought. I had a great experience here. And it's funny because I graduated from Cape in 93, went out west, and for most of the next 10 years, I wandered all over America, just exploring every nook and cranny of the country. And at first, I couldn't wait to get out of here. And the more I traveled around, the more I came to love Lewis. And then one day I had the cognition that, wow, you know, the really cool thing is I can make a living here as an artist because I can get my work in front of not only locals, but the people who come from all over the mid-Atlantic to our beautiful little town. So now I can sell my work to people from the cities without having to live in the city. So for someone who loves fresh air, that's a big deal.
So is that what brought you back?
Family. But like I said, just having that realization that I really do love it here. But I'm glad I traveled. I still love to travel. But this is a great foundational home base.
When did you first realize you loved to paint?
You know, the funny thing is I just realized recently that my first art memory was painting with chocolate pudding in preschool. And I remember thinking, this is pretty cool. I can paint and eat chocolate. It's a no-brainer. I'm in. But I started selling my work at 14. And
Really?
I started doing shows at 15. And
Here in the area?
Yeah, and I'm 48 now, so been at it for a long time. In high school, I was being pulled in multiple directions. Part of me wanted to go into the military. I kept thinking, how do I apply my artistic drive to something that's going to be profitable in the world? And I just kept thinking, I'm such a weirdo. I'm really not employable. I need to kind of carve out my own path. My dad and I used to have these discussions quite often. Around here, there was not a lot of opportunity back then. So you have a very high percentage of entrepreneurs, right? You know, you have the natural brain drain. A lot of people leave after high school, go to college, look for opportunity beyond this area. But a lot of us chose to stay, and we were forced to carve out our own lives. And it really does require a lot of creative problem solving and determination to do that. In high school, I was a straight A student, and my guidance counselor one day early, this is probably like early in 11th grade, I told her I wasn't going to college, and she just scratched her head and said, I don't understand. I'm looking at your grades. Obviously, you're going to college. And I said, no, I'm not concerned. I don't feel the need to have a degree. I don't feel the need to go work for anyone else. I just want to navigate my own path. So at that moment, she said, there's nothing I can do for you. She basically dismissed me, and I dismissed her because that's fine. I fell through the cracks. I don't want what you're selling, so I'll find my own way. But in that moment, it would have been nice to have someone say, well, here, these are some foundational elements that might help you navigate that world outside of society's expected box of high school, college, job, career path.
Is that the first time you realized you weren't necessarily going to fit into a box, that you were going to have to create your own?
I would say it was a big moment for sure, and it was a strange moment because I realized, wow, everyone's going in that direction and I'm not. And I had people very close to me cuss me out, tell me I'll never make it as an artist. I'm a fool. I've got people offering me a full ride to college, and it was pretty wild, pretty intense, pretty emotional, And basically at that point I said, well, now I've got a real challenge. Now I've got to really prove myself. So, I guess I should thank them for being jerks. I don't know. But also looking back, at the time as a child, I look at that experience differently than I look at it now. Looking back, I know that their expectation and direction came from a place of just wanting me to be okay, recognizing how wild and rare it would be for me to actually make it as an artist. Basically they saw me as a crazy dreamer, but I knew that my deep determination would get me to where I wanted to go. So basically I bought a tent and I said, I'm either going to make it as an artist or live off the land in the woods. And I really don't want to eat bugs. So here I am.
How did your parents react to this plan?
My parents were very supportive, for sure. Yeah, they really were. Mom, from a position of love and support. Dad was just a brilliant creative problem solver. His name is Jody Hudson. Entrepreneur, brilliant mind, brilliant in many aspects of life. Just a deep diver. Love to research, find out the truth. Loved creative problem solving. So he gave me a lot of skills that really helped me to navigate this strange realm outside of the ordinary. I had friends who were artists, and I watched them basically get beaten into normalcy because they didn't have that level of support. And really, I can't say that it was financial support. It was just very simply, my dad told me, well, buddy, if you want to do it, do it. But remember what I always told you, anything you do it as a professional. And that was it. Go all in, and that made a big difference.
Some people may not know that you had a large role in a local movie, a dark comedy called Havendale. How did this opportunity evolve?
Actually, it's kind of funny. A couple buddies were creating a film over in Ellendale. They sent me some pictures, and I said, wow, you guys are serious. They said, oh, yeah, we raised a lot of money, spent a lot of money, and we're doing it right. And I asked them what the plot was, and they said it was two brothers that were robbing a bingo hall. That was kind of the nature of the film. And at the time, I was reading a very interesting book about a guy who defected from the CIA and decided to spill the beans about everything he'd done over the last 30 years. And I said, I feel like you need a Bond element in your movie there. Don't you think that it would be better with a cocaine smuggling assassin?
A cocaine smuggling assassin? That was your offer?
Well, I thought it was funny. And they said I was crazy. So then what happened was their lead actor basically tried to strong-arm them. And he said, I want a percentage of the action. And they said, dude, what action? There's no action. This is a short film we're doing for fun, and we went into debt to do it. This is just a passion project. He's like, oh, no, I know there'll be millions on the other side of this. Like, dude, you're crazy. So then basically the project collapsed. And I said, my offer still stands. Are you ready? Let's do this. And so we kind of rewrote the whole story, and my character shot the other character using CGI. Then I became the lead, the cocaine smuggling assassin.
So it went from a bingo hall robbery to...
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, this local network was basically uncovered, and it was really a very interesting project. So many of us grew up on action films. It's just like the steady diet as children, So being able to be a part of something like that was really cool.
There's a picture floating around out there where you're not holding a paintbrush, you're holding what looks like the most expansive sniper rifle I've ever seen with a silencer on it the size of a Volkswagen. Was that in the movie?
It was. That was my character. I'm also an avid target shooter. I actually teach people how to shoot as well. That's my other form of meditation. I really enjoy target shooting. So, yeah, basically I was the actor, and I supplied some equipment for the film as well. Although I don't have a silencer. They're illegal in Delaware. That was simply
just want to make that very clear.
That was simply a movie prop. And actually, one of the reasons you can't see the film online is because we were contacted and told, you have broken so many laws in this movie, you all need to get an attorney. And so the team decided they wanted to just scrub the movie from existence. So that's why it's not viewable anywhere, unfortunately, because we had a massive threat, which is interesting because if you think about it, every Hollywood action movie we watch is full of crime from beginning to end. But somehow we were singled out and our team was intimidated. I mean, I personally didn't care, but, I understood their concerns.
So
there was not a budget for an attorney.
And I think, if I heard correctly, the actual Ellendale police chief was involved, right?
He loved the project. So all the supposed crimes that we committed were done under the watchful eye of local law enforcement, and they loved every minute of it. Because, like I said, who doesn't love action movies, right?
That's right. Like so many others who live here, you're also involved in the community. Is that right?
Of course. It's our community. We've got to take responsibility for it, right? So I think that it's important as members of the community that we take responsibility for our role in the community and also the community at large, right? We all have various passion projects that we get involved with. One of the big ones that I was involved with for a while was the Fort Miles Museum at Cape Henlopen State Park. I love history. I love the park. And I think that museum is an incredible, wonderful element here in our local community. I was instrumental there in creating an underground, well, the whole thing is underground, but the Schroeder Museum and an art gallery. So because Fort Miles Bunker is actually an artifact itself, we weren't allowed to penetrate walls in order to hang artwork. So I designed a structure. It was a wall system that basically put tension vertically against the ceiling and against the floor to suspend these vertical panels so that we could hang art without touching the walls.
Most artists don't have their own gallery. What led you to open your own?
Let's see. One thing was I really like to meet the collectors that buy my work. My paintings take me many months to do, so they're basically my offspring. I don't have children. I've got my paintings. They're my creations. And that natural barrier that's placed between an artist and the collector, it always kind of bothered me. But as a businessman, I understand it, right? A gallery owner needs to maintain a sales pathway, has to have commission in order to keep the lights on. So I definitely get that. For me, it was just, all right, I wonder if I can do this on my own without having to go through other galleries. And then also, I was actually in a lot of galleries prior to the 08-09 crash. About 25 galleries around the East Coast, some out West. And a common occurrence started to happen, which was they did not want to pay me. Some of them just walked away, kept my art, closed the doors, and disappeared. And there are all these things that kept pointing me to the direction of, well, you wouldn't have that problem if you had your own gallery. And there were about 6 different reasons that brought me to that same conclusion. It's time to open your own gallery.
I don't mean to sound naive, but gallery owners would do that? They would just take your painting and walk?
I didn't think they would, but they did.
Wow.
Right, exactly.
I had no idea. And you also, in addition to your gallery, you also teach.
I do.
And do you teach in the gallery?
I do. I do small classes, basically 1 to 5 students. I like that level of connection, I've never taught a large class. I think I would like the challenge at some point. But I know that the way I paint and the way I teach it's very difficult to really understand. So it takes a lot of hands-on demonstration. So a lot of times when I teach, I paint with my students. So I teach by demonstration. I figure us artists are mostly visual learners.
Did you meet your wife here?
I did. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's also a native of Delaware.
And I know she runs a very popular yoga studio.
Yeah, she has Involution Yoga. She's also a very excellent massage therapist. Yeah, so we're both trying to, present a calming factor in the community, right?
One last question. What is it about Lewis that attracts so many creative people, whether it's art, restaurants, community services, business, museums, and on and on? It's so much more than geography, architecture, or history. What is it?
Wow, it's a very good question. Well, it is a very aesthetic small town. We're on the coast, which, the coast is a natural draw for many people. And I think over the past 3 years, we've really seen a massive influx of people coming to Lewis. And I think that it goes back to that desire for calm. If you look at the craziness of the world, as it accelerates, people are just fleeing cities to come to small town America. And we're just at a perfect place because of the, I would say the taxes around here are a big draw. But also it's just a beautiful place to live. Now, as far as the creative element and why that might flourish here, I would say one of the words that comes to mind is a word that people love to toss around. That's sustainability. So if I've got an art gallery, and if you have a restaurant, or the beautiful restaurant we're in right now, Kindle, we need to have a client base that can sustain us, right? So if we were all artists and restaurant owners in a place where no one visited, we'd have a hard time keeping the lights on in our galleries and restaurants. So luckily we've got the creators and we've got the appreciators. I'd say you have to have that symbiotic relationship to keep the game going.
Thanks, Brax. Thanks for your candor and insight into your life as an artist. Even more so, it's been fascinating to learn how you look upon art from someone who can't draw. And thanks to our sponsor, Ray Damager Design, a full-service graphic design company in the heart of Lewis. Ray is as creative as he is wonderful to work with. And thanks to you for being a listener and supporting the podcast. For more information, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, or on our website, We in Lewis. As always, please feel free to share your thoughts and comments, or if you can, review us on your podcast service. Till next time, this has been We in Lewis, the podcast.